Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So I have a very important message that I need to share with you guys today. So I was recently speaking with a cybersecurity specialist who used to work with the U.S. Armed Forces, has some connections with people who work with the NSA, among other things, now works in private consulting. But we're going to talk about what they told me about what we can expect to see in the coming days and weeks ahead with respect to the tension between East and West. And it is very, very serious. Now, right out the gates, I want to say something, guys. The whole premise of this channel is to get people prepared for SHTF. It's all about preparedness, learning survival skills, just being squared away for when times get hard. It is not about inciting panic and anxiety and prompting people to make irrational financial decisions or other decisions, okay? This is not a political channel. This is not a channel that's just about selling stuff. I know people think that. I am first and foremost a prepper. I always have been. Everything that's come after that has been secondary. So if this is all a grift, then I'm the first victim of the grift. And I want to say that the goal is not to panic. The goal is to keep composed, calm, cool, and collected so that when things happen, okay, we're not freaking out and losing our heads and all this. And I am guilty in the past week or so of ratcheting up the tension on this channel, and that's because that's a reflection of what I see in the world. I do think, however, that we run the risk of desensitizing ourselves to how bad it could actually get, because we got to remember out here in the far west, in North America, that things could look like Ukraine here someday, or much worse. And if we're losing our heads about how bad it is now, just imagine how bad we could be losing our heads when it gets a lot worse. So I just want people to not panic about things. Just stay composed, keep doing what you're doing, keep prepping. But I want to explain also why the intensity and the mannerism which I'm bringing you this information has been ratcheting up. And it's because some people don't realize, but for the longest time, I was never a big believer in World War III. I thought that the global patchwork of financial interconnectedness around the world, you know, the fact that there's corporations who are binding countries in ways which were never binded in the past. You got to remember, World War II, there wasn't a lot of international trade then, which is why it was so easy for countries to forego whatever sort of trade relations they had and go to war with each other. As a hedge against that right now, or at least I thought it was a hedge against it, all these financial interconnectedness that we have with our various countries, be it Russia, China, and what have you. Russia, for example, China and the US are the biggest trading partners. And of course, they're also, we know that at some point these two countries are likely to have some sort of kinetic war in the future. And it's just strange to see that. Now, that was part of the reason why I thought it could never happen. Why has my tune changed in the last 2 weeks? Well, basically, the breakneck speed in which we all started to view Putin as the face of evil, okay? When only 3 months prior to that, these guys were, at the G20, shaking each other's hands, our leaders, I mean, and smiling and getting along. And it showed me that it was all just a ruse. It was all just a poker face that countries put on for the cameras. But at the end of the day, we are at war, unfortunately. We're not at war with each other as the peasant underclass of all these countries, but our leaders and our militaries of the world are at war. And eventually it goes kinetic. Right now it's on the level of an information war and a trade war, but as we're seeing in the Ukraine, it's becoming kinetic, okay? So the speed in which they threw Putin under the bus, and by throwing him under the bus, I'm talking about the global oligarchs. We're always hearing about the Russian oligarchs, but there's oligarchs everywhere. And the speed at which they threw him under the bus, and the 74% of Americans who want to enforce a no-fly zone, even though it would likely entail NATO going to war with Russia. And of course, if NATO goes to war with Russia, China's going to get involved, and it's going to be World War III, and it very likely would go nuclear. Those things are what have made me do a 180 on things, and that's why I've been kind of sounding the alarm on, what I'm hearing from my distributors who are saying that they're sending all of this personal protective equipment, tens of thousands of articles of PPE overseas to Europe, and that's just one of the many pieces of information that I've shared with you guys over the last few months that are all pointing towards a global conflict is imminent. Now, at the same time, I don't want to be the nuclear war guy either, okay? I still think there's a greater likelihood that cooler heads are going to prevail and that we're going to resolve these issues, but right now it's looking pretty bad. It's looking that this doesn't end in a nice way, okay? I can't see a world right now where Putin backs down, or where Zelensky backs down, or where they come to some sort of compromise where Zelensky remains in power and, you know, they find some sort of arbitration somewhere. I just can't see it. So, and I could be wrong though, because we only see what the cameras want us to see. Now, on that note, you guys got to remember, okay? Remember when in Afghanistan, when a few months before that, Biden said to the cameras, he said, it's all going to be all right. Everything's going to smooth over. You know, that the Afghanistan government's not going to fall. The Taliban's not going to take over. And look what happened. And he said that in such a bold-faced, explicit way that even I believed it. I didn't have any reason not to believe him because, for one, I don't really know a whole lot about the situation. But that just goes to show when Blinken is saying that he thinks that Putin's going to fail and this Russian invasion is going to fail and it's doomed, you got to keep that in mind, that all throughout history, politicians have lied to us. And just so people don't think I'm harping on the left, we all remember what Trump said back in February of 2020 when he said, you know, 6 people have this virus. 1 week it's here, the next week it's there, you know, it's gone. We all know what happened as a result of that. So this is not something which is unique to any political party. This is just how politics work, all right? So just remember that. And this is why I'm so concerned about what's going on right now. And I heard a great quote by George Gammon over at the Rebel Capitalist channel the other day. Shout out to him. And he's the Rebel Capitalist, but he was quoting Lenin in this quote. And the quote by Lenin was that, you know, decades can go by when nothing happens, but weeks can go by when decades happen. And I just thought that was such a profound statement for what we're seeing right now, because literally over the course of a few weeks, we've had this watershed moment in human history, and things are just simply not going back to normal. We thought that COVID couldn't be topped as a black swan event that shook the markets up. Well, just wait to see what this situation can do. It is going to get bad. Now, before we dive into the hacking stuff and all the other news we have to cover, I need to tell you guys that I'm hearing a lot of information about covert troop deployments to Eastern Europe around the world. Now, this is all anecdotal, and I can't attest to the validity of these claims, but I can say that it makes perfect sense that you would want to deploy troops in a covert fashion so that the enemy didn't know what you were doing. So if we're saying we're sending 7,000 troops from the US, and I say we because I view Canada and the United States, we're basically interchangeable at this point. When we say we're sending such and such amount of troops, you can bet that we're probably sending a lot more. And whatever we are telegraphing, there's a reason why we're telegraphing it. It's because we want the enemy to know that, okay? And the same thing goes with Russia. When they say we're going to do something over here, you know that there's a reason for that, and it's usually to confuse and basically trick the enemy into thinking something. So if the US is saying, hey, we're going to send some Patriot missile systems to Poland, there's a reason for that. Now, could that reason be, because of course everybody knows about the whole Polish plane US fiasco by now, I'm not even going to bother explaining it, but could it be that they're deploying these there now in anticipation of the fact that Poland may in fact be some kind of staging ground for air support to Ukraine, but they need that missile defense in place first, in such case that Russia was going to preemptively strike their aircraft hangars and facilities? It's a possibility. There is a real concern that Russia is not going to stop at Ukraine. I don't know how legitimate those concerns are. Could just be Western propaganda. Who knows? Remember, propaganda is on both sides. We try to assess things objectively here because we don't want to get looped into the starry-eyed propaganda of either side. We want to view this from the perspective of how can we as preppers self-preserve ourselves, our families, and our communities. Now, as for the covert troop deployment thing, I'm hearing that troops are being moved from Iraq and other countries where they're deployed into these regions. And you could do this under the cover of, I mean, it would make perfect sense that you're not going to basically put all your chips on the table, right? You're not going to show all your cards. Sorry, wrong metaphor. And that just makes perfect sense to me, that if they are deploying troops in mass, it would be done in secret. And like I said, I'm getting multiple reports from people around the United States and around the world, for that matter, of increased troop deployment to Eastern Europe. And that would make perfect sense if they were ratcheting up for a bigger conflict. Okay, so what else do we have in the news? One of the biggest things on the news right now is the Chernobyl incident, the threat of chemical weapons, and the hospital that was bombed. All of these things are going to be used as a way to try to goad NATO into getting actively involved, or more actively involved, in Ukraine. You could see that Zelensky is shouting at the top of his lungs that he needs NATO support, he needs armaments, he needs weapons and all this stuff. And depending on who you talk to, some generals think that it's a good idea, not many, or ex-generals, I should say, and political pundits think that enforcing a no-fly zone, sending stuff in there, is a good idea, because if you let Russia get a foothold there, then they're going to do Moldova, they might do Hungary, Poland, Romania, all the rest. Some people think that. Some people think that's just propaganda, and that's going to escalate into World War III. Now, the biggest and most concerning statistic for me is that 74% of Americans would support a no-fly zone, which almost inevitably would lead to some kind of entanglement with NATO and Russia, which would ultimately lead, of course, to a greater war, which very well could go nuclear. So that means that 74% of people either were duped by some questionnaire, the way that the survey was structured. They're not always structured in the most scientific of ways, these polls. That either means that they were tricked, or that 74% of people have absolutely no idea how foreign affairing works. So that's concerning for me. And that statistics maps perfectly on to the statistic with respect to the normalcy bias, that in most disasters, 70% of people don't move until it's too late. And I've talked about that before, so we're not even going to go there. Now, let's talk about this chemical weapons thing, okay? People are saying that Russia is going to use chemical weapons. Now, we have to ask ourselves why. Why on earth would it be strategically useful at all for them to do that? I mean, just think about it. What would the purpose of that be, other than for the rest of the world to say how bad they were and to provide more justification to go in there and intervene somehow? It doesn't seem like it would make any sense. Maybe you could argue that in the context of urban warfare, something like that would be useful, because you'd have a lot of guys hiding in buildings and snipers and stuff like that. But I still don't think they would be willing to risk it for the small strategic gains there might be in using it, and when they could just blow up buildings with artillery. I just can't see it. So I'm very wary about all this stuff. And we've told you guys last week about how they're going to be putting weapons in various places. And this is a standard tactic in war. This is a standard part of guerrilla warfare, okay? This is what they do in the occupied Palestine regions and all the rest, where they will basically put military stuff in and around civilian populations. So with the hopes, I suppose, and this is the best way of looking at it, with the hopes that they're not going to be targeted there. And if they are targeted there, then they can draw global condemnation on the enemy when they inevitably try to shoot those things. Now, it's very difficult right now to try to ascertain what the truth is in all this. But if we just put on our logical thinking caps for a second, I'm pretty sure we can come to the conclusion that Russia would have absolutely nothing to gain from using chemical weapons. Okay, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And we've heard this line before: weapons of mass destruction. Anybody? What was that one little girl prior to the Iraq War? There was something about it was all just made up. I can't remember what it was, but they were doing something to kids in orphanages and getting rid of babies and stuff like this. But we have to be very, very skeptical of these things, because we know right now there's some warhawks out there who are looking for any opportunity to pull us into this thing, and they're going to pull on people's heartstrings because they know the majority of people are good. The majority of people want to feel like they're doing something good. And just remember that the road to hell was paved with good intentions. Almost every major, massive evil that was perpetuated in this world was done in the name of good. So just remember that. Now, the Chernobyl thing, apparently they're saying, and I don't know if there's any truth to this whatsoever, it's so hard to sift between the wheat and the chaff here, but Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry something or other said on Wednesday Russia must urgently observe a temporary ceasefire to allow repairs on a power line to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, saying radiation could be leaked if an electricity outage continues. Reserve diesel generators have a 48-hour capacity to power Chernobyl. So ironic that a nuclear power facility needs an external power source to power itself. Even though I was talking to Arthur Bradley, the NASA engineer, the other day, and he said that some nuclear power plants now can actually self-power and self-cool the spent fuel rods. So it's not much of a problem, but they're kind of, this is just one more of those things where it's like, okay, we need to go and intervene because they're bombing hospitals, they're spraying chemicals on people, and it's going to be nuclear Armageddon. Now, some people have speculated that maybe all this personal protective gear is being sent to Europe because they're worried about this chemical stuff and this nuclear stuff. That may well be, that could be, but I still think that they're probably preparing for something a lot bigger, and it starts with a capital N, okay? So anyways, what else do we got in terms of information before we dive into the cybersecurity stuff? Okay, let's just quickly talk about this situation going on in Hong Kong. Now, apparently there's some strain of Omicron in Hong Kong. The debate is raging among scientists on whether the new mutation is key to Hong Kong's shocking death rate or if it's just coincidental. So COVID mortality in the city is 29 deaths per million. That's not per million cases, that's just per million inhabitants, okay? And dwarfing Australia's worst ever mortality rate, which was 3.4 per million. So that's almost 10 times the mortality rate. Its 7-day average of 193 deaths per day in a city of 7.5 million even surpasses India with a population of 1.4 billion, currently averaging 180 daily deaths. Well, who knows how accurate those numbers are in India. There's so many people in the rural communities that probably just aren't counted. But this is something we should potentially keep an eye on because, like I say, I don't think COVID is finished with the news cycle yet. I have a feeling that everything is going to get a return, and that is going to be one of those things. Now, with respect to the cybersecurity stuff, so I was speaking with a cybersecurity specialist today who I've consulted with to do some other cyber attack videos in the past. One of my main videos that I've done on the topic was what would happen in the first 12 hours of a major cyber war. Go check that out if you will. And he was just providing me with some information, and basically from his standpoint, this is a guy who's right in the mix, okay? White hat hacker, has connections with people who work in the NSA and things of that nature. And he was basically saying that he thinks that any day the big cyber war can hit. And what do we mean by the big cyber war? Well, if you don't know, there's millions and millions of cyber attacks on all countries every single day. In fact, he sent me a website that you can go and check out. It's Threat Map Checkpoint, and it's almost like the flight radar of cyber attacks, okay? So you can see all the cyber attacks as they're happening in real time. But something to keep in mind is that that website is only recording cyber attacks which are documented by that particular security company. So it's just a drop in the bucket of what is actually happening. Now, he said that any day now, the big cyber war can start, okay? There's countries that have what they call 0 days, which are basically backdoors into a variety of different programs, be they programs related to the power grid, government programs, anything that's related to critical infrastructure. There's a lot of latent, dormant malware that exists on the cyberspace of these critical infrastructural companies right now, and they're just waiting for the right time to execute. And they know that when they execute on their end, that we're going to execute on our end. So in the same way that we have this nuclear button that could get pushed, with Russia and the United States, there's also a big red button for the cyber war, because there is on the computers in all of our major institutions right now, and this is well known about, that there is latent malware that's just ready to be activated, which could bring down power grids, it could destroy water treatment facilities, it could make traffic lights go haywire, it could wipe out people's bank accounts. The outcomes of this could be incredibly dire. I mean, just imagine the effect of like a massive DNS attack where you couldn't access the internet for a short period of time. Just imagine the effect that that would have on global logistics, on your ability to access money from the bank, okay, to do any sort of thing online that you needed to do. And that is just but one of many things. And so, like I say, this isn't something that, he just told me. This is a documented fact that there are some big 0 days out there that countries, nation states are holding on to, and they're waiting to execute when the time is right. Now, the question is, how far does Russia get pushed before it starts to, open Pandora's box in cyberspace? And according to him, Russia is the small prize in this, okay? It's China who is the one to watch out for. They have a much larger presence in the cybersecurity space. So that means that, if China does get involved, then that's when we're going to have some hard times in terms of, our power grids being compromised. Now, he told me something about how the company that he worked for, one of the companies that he works for, recently fired we'll just say several thousand Russian employees just immediately. And this is pretty intense, considering that the rapid decoupling that we're having here of Russia and the United States. And to me, this is something that you would do in the run-up to some sort of kinetic exchange between the two countries. When you're telling your people that you need to get out of Russia because you may be persecuted in the future, well, why might you be persecuted? Could it be because the war is going to escalate? Could it be because, things are going to get worse? It's likely, okay? And that's why I think that this thing is going to escalate, and these are things that you would expect to see before that transpired. So just keep that in mind, that right now, I believe they're trying to get everything all prepared for when that inevitably does happen. Now, we talked about a lot of other things which are a bit more detailed and perhaps too nuanced for us to discuss here in this short video today. But all you need to know is that the cyber attacks are ratcheting up. He said that they were up about 150%, which is significant, although they are very small-scale attacks. They're not using their big weapons yet, okay? But that is coming. I do believe that is coming, and we need to prepare for it. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, the purpose of this channel is not to incite panic, and it's not just to give the news and talk about stuff and theorize about what's going to happen, prognosticate. It's about getting you prepared for what might potentially come. This doesn't mean living in paranoia, living in fear, and running off to the supermarket and loading up with a year's worth of food. You want to do these things gradually. We still need to keep a cool head with things. And, don't annoy the heck out of your family members and your friends, because they might just, alienate you, or you might alienate them, I should say, if you do that. But just stay prepared, guys, because things are really starting to heat up. And just covertly keep on doing what you're doing. And we are going to be getting back to basics in terms of the typical content that most people are used to on this channel. I got quite a few subs in the last month doing these daily briefs with people. And I appreciate that you're all here for that information, but I strongly would encourage you to pair that with a more practical approach, where you're actually learning the skills, where you're procuring the things that you might need if times get hard. And we have a library of videos to help you do that, as well as a lot of other channels like Full Spectrum Survival, The Urban Prepper, City Prepping. We get together and occasionally have a group chat on the Think Preparedness YouTube channel, where we go into greater depth about a lot of things as well. But there's just a great community of preppers out there who are showing people how to do stuff. And I would encourage you right now, the time is ripe. If you gotta, get yourself in a position where you'll be able to ride out a grid down situation, now is the time to do it. Don't wait any longer. This is the time. There is no time left to waste. I'm going to be releasing a video tomorrow that goes over the A to Z, what to do when seconds count, when minutes count, when hours count, days, weeks, months, years, even decades. Okay, we're going to be talking about it all, and it's all condensed into a nice 15-minute video for you guys. So I appreciate all the positive feedback, and I do appreciate the critical comments as well, as long as they're cogent comments and they're not, passive aggressive or just trolling. If you make a good faith argument in the comment section, I will respond. Okay, and some people think once again that I'm just doing this to sell stuff. Look, guys, I could be pitching my store in every single video for 2 minutes. I have no interest in doing that. In fact, I don't want you to shop at my store. We're too busy anyways, and the delays are just too long right now. And yes, but I do want you to get squared away wherever you can. But I'm a prepper, man. Before I ever started this channel, and I never started this channel with the thought of even monetizing at all. That's just something that kind of comes when you're passionate about something. And my whole thing is not to get all blinged out and buy a fancy house or anything like that. It's to get my ass off the grid while the getting's good. So that's what I'm saving all my pennies for, and I hope that's what you're doing as well. But you guys take care, stay safe. Talk to you soon. Canadian Prepper out.